When the leader of the Islamic State, al-Baghdadi, said Islam is not the religion of peace, Islam is the religion of war, did he mean it? I mean, would he have said it if he didn't mean it? I mean, I could go around preaching that, the moon is made out of cheese, and I could mean it, but am I right? So there's no question that al-Baghdadi means it, but is he right? And we could go over a lot of reasons, like the lay people out there have their opinions on Islam and the Quran, and they've studied it perhaps a little bit, and they're all writing articles and making YouTube videos about why Islam is the religion of war and so on. But I just thought, man, if we could get somebody at the high-end credibility range to speak to this issue and say, yes, he's right, and here's why. Well, we found this man. His name is John Guandolo. And John, let me tell you something. John is the man to go to when it comes to questions like this. In 1996, Mr. Guandolo joined the FBI, serving at the Washington field office, primarily conducting narcotics investigations domestically and overseas. In 2001, he served as the FBI liaison to the U.S. Capitol Police, investigating threats to the president, Vice President, members of Congress, and other high-level government officials. Shortly after 9/11, Mr. Guandolo began an assignment to the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI's Washington field office, developing an expertise in the Muslim Brotherhood. Many of our audience members will recognize the name Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic doctrine, the global Islamic movement, and a myriad of terrorist organizations to include Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and others. Now, in 2006, Mr. Guandolo created and implemented the FBI's first counterterrorism training education program. If you want to go to somebody who has experience at the top of the chain, this is the guy you want to go to, the guy who implemented the first FBI counterterrorism training and education program, right? Focusing on the Muslim Brotherhood and their subversive movement in the United States, Islamic doctrine, and the global Islamic movement. He was designated a subject matter expert by FBI headquarters. This course was hailed as groundbreaking by the FBI's executive assistant director in a brief to the vice president's national security staff for his efforts. Mr. Guandolo was presented the Defender of the Homeland Award by U.S. Senators John Kyle and Joseph Lieberman on behalf of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. While in the FBI, Mr. Guandolo received 2 United States Attorney's Awards for investigative excellence. Mr. Guandolo, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Listen, now let's get right to it here. I know you're a busy guy. Back in April, you issued a warning on a certain event that was coming to the Capitol Hill, and it was called the Muslim Advocacy Day. Do you have an update on that for us, since we're now in May here?
I do. Interestingly enough, that event, there are a couple big points to be made about that event. The Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, and primarily the Muslim Brotherhood's Hamas organizations, like Council on American Islamic Relations and others that are either Hamas or support entities for Hamas, joined together to create the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations. And that is meant to be the first Muslim political party in the United States. And so Muslim Advocacy Day is when they went up to the Hill and met with legislators and basically spewed their nonsense about how nice they were and how moderate they were, when in fact this is, again, just another part of their long-term political influence operations here in the United States. But it also demonstrates how bold they are, and how sure they must be that FBI and DHS are just going to sit on their hands while they run roughshod over our U.S. Capitol and our members of Congress.
Wow. So the people who have the ability to put a stop to these are terrorists, after all, right?
Yeah, we would call them terrorists. They're jihadis, but yes, that's what they are. And because they wear suits currently and pretend like they're nice, we just take them at their word. It's pretty outrageous. But of course, then you see, you've got on the one hand, and on the other hand, FBI director saying there may be thousands of individuals in this country that support and ISIS, just
Right.
ISIS.
Right.
We're not even talking about Al Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and others. So, and we've got a significant problem here. And it doesn't, mostly, the problem is not individuals who want to blow things up or shoot people or do other things like that.
Right.
They're men and women, but men in suits who talk as if they're friendly. But we know, because of a massive amount of evidence we have, that when they speak to each other behind closed doors, their intentions are nefarious and illegal, because they're plotting to overthrow the United States.
John, people are pulling their hair out right now. There are 16 U.S. government intelligence agencies in existence. Surely you're not the only one who sees this. Why are they allowing this, John?
Well, now that's a bigger question, and it's probably, I would say that the question I get the most is, how is this happening? And there are a number of reasons. One, I think there's gross unprofessional behavior going on in the leadership. I think it's a catastrophic failure of the leadership, the political leadership, as well as the law enforcement intelligence leadership at the federal level. When I can go into, and I do regularly, I just did last week, and I do usually a few times a month, and brief law enforcement officials at the state and local level. And when I brief or have had FBI agents and DHS, CIA employees at my 3-day training programs that lay the threat out, usually somewhere between 97 and 100% of them have never heard of the Muslim Brotherhood's movement in the United States. I just had a call last night for somebody who briefed a senior person who is actually a personal friend of theirs in one of the intelligence agencies. And I mean, their jaw hit the ground. They were like, I've never heard any of this. And so there's part of it is unprofessional behavior, but part of it is the enemy's focus in what they're doing is to ensure that when our government officials turn to get advice, when they look to the left or to the right, they're talking to a Muslim brother, their Islamic advisor. Now, that in and of itself is unprofessional conduct. But when those leaders, like Secretary of Homeland Security, Johnson currently, Ms. Napolitano previously, who are openly working with known Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood entities, it's a different story if you didn't know that. You're a radio talk show host.
Right.
But when you're in a position where you swear an oath to the Constitution that comes with a legally binding oath with statutory requirements to know or do due diligence to know these threats, and we can show, because I do every time I present this, that this evidence is readily available and significant, that it's unprofessionalism at a level we've never seen in our country. The next step, however, is when we have Americans who are dead now in places like New York, Arlington, Virginia, Boston, thank God not in Garland, Texas, or Fort Bliss and other places, but we have them, around the country, Fort Hood. And, we put doctors and lawyers in jail when people die because of their unprofessional behavior. I think national security professionals should be held to the same standard.
Wow. This is on a level of addressing the security of the nation, and these people are responsible for the security of the nation. Does this fall under the category of treason? Should we throw the big T word out there, John?
I think it does. I think in some cases it does. I think we can demonstrate there are people inside the government who know who these people are. They know that they're bad, but out of fear or out of self-preservation for their career, they're not doing what they're legally bound to do. That is treason. If you know who these people are and you can continue to allow them, it's certainly misprison of treason, meaning you're knowledgeable that this is going on and you're doing nothing about it, even though you're not willingly participating in the acts to overthrow the government. Misprison of treason is it's taking place, you have an official capacity to do something, and you do nothing. And it doesn't matter. The law doesn't say well, if you're scared or you want to get your next promotion, then it's okay. So yes, I believe that is on the table. And I think the first time we actually put someone in handcuffs, like an FBI director or former FBI director, or Secretary of Homeland Security, or CIA director, or assistant director of the FBI, or a member of Congress for aiding and abetting the enemy and materially supporting the enemy, or the chief of staff to the President of the United States, or the National Security Advisor. I think as soon as you put those people in handcuffs, they will put a chill over this nonsense. But it's going to take some very drastic action and some pretty intense leadership that seems to be completely missing from inside our government agencies right now.
Listen, I've got a question for you here. A lot of people have been wondering this. Who is Huma Abedin? What is her connection to the Muslim Brotherhood? And what influence will she have on the next president if Hillary is elected?
Well, Huma Abedin comes from a Muslim Brotherhood family. She herself works with and has worked with Muslim Brotherhood entities like the Muslim Student Association. She worked closely with the Islamic Society in North America, which is the largest Muslim Brotherhood organization in North America. And through evidence in the largest terrorism financing and Hamas trial in American history, we have documents that demonstrate money went right from their account to Hamas leaders and Hamas organizations overseas.
Unbelievable.
And the leader of ISNA, the outgoing president, sits on the Homeland Security Advisory Committee, moderates panel discussions at the CIA, and has won awards from the FBI because when he speaks. And by the way, the chief of staff to the president, who previously was the deputy national security advisor, spoke at this guy's mosque in Sterling, Virginia. Dennis McDonough, who's now the chief of staff, spoke at the Adams Center in Herndon, Virginia, which is a Hamas Muslim Brotherhood center. The leader is Mohammed Majid, who is the outgoing president of ISNA. And again, the largest Hamas trial in U.S. history, the evidence demonstrated ISNA sent money directly from their accounts to known Hamas entities and leaders. And again, just as a reminder, Hamas is a terrorist organization as designated by the United States and other nations, allied nations. So that's where we are. So Huma Abedin is associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Her mother, her father, and her brother have all been significantly involved in major Muslim Brotherhood organizations overseas. So there's no, and her brother. There's no question about her ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. But this is, and maybe for your audience, a good way to frame this is much more, the threat is much more a espionage and counterintelligence issue than it is a, quote, terrorism issue.
Okay.
These individuals primarily are conducting political warfare, influence operations, subversion, propaganda, that kind of stuff. And it's stuff that our government, quite frankly, has never been good at defeating. We did an okay job at it during the Cold War, but it wasn't until President Reagan absolutely went full bore at all levels, going at the Soviet Union, that we had an impact. But as far as the CIA, the FBI, first of all, no training almost. The CIA would argue they do training in political warfare and stuff, but it's absolutely minimal.
Wow.
The average case officer for the CIA or FBI case agent working counterintelligence is a junior high schooler compared to our adversaries,
Wow.
the Russians, the Chinese, the Cubans, the Islamic countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. Those countries, and including the Muslim Brotherhood, these are seasoned intelligence officers, and even those that aren't have spent years doing this. In some countries, the older guys did it in countries underground, so they knew how to do it and survive. And so coming here to the United States, it's like a kid in a candy shop.
John, this is why I read your credentials at the start. I know it was a little bit long, but listen, people needed to know this about you, because had it been anyone else, this is unbelievable what you're telling people. I mean, how good at it, quote unquote, do the U.S. intelligence agencies have to be in order to simply say, look, if you have these deep ties to Muslim Brotherhood, you cannot be the right-hand man or woman of the Secretary of State of the United States. And Ahmadin was the right-hand person of Hillary Clinton during her tenure as the Secretary of State. And is she not still involved with Hillary Clinton today even?
Yeah, she is. And, just to give you a perspective as to the professionalism, the FBI, if you're in the counterintelligence program versus let's say just a Russian counterintelligence officer for Russia currently, and this was true during the days of the Soviet Union. The training for an average case officer in the former KGB, now FSB, and they've broken up into other agencies. But you're looking 3 to 4 years of training. You're looking at added years, 1 to 2 years of language training, and then some other additional specialty training that they might get. No less, though, than no less than 5 years of training. And then normally they would go into, for instance, a third world country or something like that. And before they come to Europe and the United States, usually they'd have some experience operating elsewhere. Now, in the FBI, for instance, there's a 4-week course to certify you as a counterintelligence officer, and then they set you loose. I want you to just think about that from just a basic professionalism standpoint. So you might have a 27-year-old, FBI case agent with 30 days of training set loose on a 50-year-old case officer from, I don't know, Russia, China, who already has, 5+ years of actual training,
Right.
and then experience in the field.
Right.
Who's going to win that?
Who's going to win it?
Right. When you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, you look at the first generation of Muslim Brotherhood guys who are pretty old right now, but even the second generation who came out of these places and spent decades in the Middle East when the KGB was there, and in other countries when they were being sought after. So even the guys that weren't formally trained learned to operate underground, and then they come to the United States. It's like it's a joke to them.
Right.
They're able to walk in offices of FBI directors, be invited into meetings. Your advice is taken. You can talk about how the FBI needs to not be so mean to the Muslim community and take our advice. And so here we are, almost 15 years after 9/11, an attack conspired by and perpetrated by Muslims, claiming Sharia as the doctrine they're following,
Right.
as a command from Allah to attack the infidels. 15 of those 19 hijackers are from Saudi Arabia. We know that from the 9/11 report and other information that Iran helped train some of the bomb makers for Al-Qaeda. Iran's Hezbollah threat, which is an arm of the Iranian government, is a massive threat. And the two largest funders of the global war on terror, as we call it, are Iran and Saudi Arabia. And after 9/11, 15 years later, we haven't touched Iran or Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
We still consider Saudi Arabia an ally, and the Muslim Brotherhood, per the declaration of the President of the United States, is going to be our liaison to the Muslim world. I mean, this is madness. The Muslim Brotherhood's own bylaws say that their entire purpose for existence is to impose Sharia in the world.
Right.
And the Islamic nations must, quote, fight the tyrants and enemies of Islam as a prelude to establishing the Islamic State. So the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, all of these have the same stated objective, the imposition of Sharia and the establishment of Islamic State globally as their number one goal. That's the reason they exist. And they all say they've got the same objective. And so what we do in the government is we go after a group or an individual. Right now it's ISIS. You'd think Al-Qaeda just disappeared. if you watch the news or listen to the FBI or DHS, apparently Al-Qaeda no longer exists.
Right.
But that's actually not true. They do exist, and they are still planning
Right.
and plotting and strategizing. And Al-Qaeda in the Balkans is becoming very violent and aggressive. But we try to separate it by group instead of by the fact that they all have the exact same objective per their own statements.
I guess we're getting into some of the next topic item here, and we're going to get to that after the break. But I guess I should have simplified my question earlier. I have a 15-year-old son. He'll be 16 soon, and I've seen pictures of Abedin, and she's not a big woman. She's a slight woman. My son is bigger than she is. Okay, let's put this all into perspective here. A lot of people are wondering, John, and this may be an oversimplification to you because you are in the depths of it at the highest levels, or have been at least. But to the simple man, John, I mean, getting back to my son, he could be tasked with being given a list. This is the list of people who are in the White House who have ties to Muslim Brotherhood. I want you to go and tap them on the shoulder and say, get out of the people's house. Get out of our house. You do not belong here. Why is this not happening, John? Why isn't it just a simple thing as you have ties to Muslim Brotherhood, you are in the people's house, the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, get out. Why is it not that simple? Is it just a simple case of we're dying from we've got the gun of political correctness pointed at our temples, ready to pull the trigger here? Is that what's happening?
Well, in the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood is not designated a terrorist organization. Number one, it is in other nations, oddly enough, Russia, Saudi Arabia,
I see,
and others. But the Muslim Brotherhood is the root of Al Qaeda, Hamas, and nearly all of the terrorist organizations on the planet today.
Right.
So that's first problem. Second problem is you have a president who is openly supporting terrorist organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood. We materially supported Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya and Syria, and are doing it elsewhere. I think if you just look at the man, the president, and his policies, you see that there's a real connection there. But even if you put all that aside, the policies of this country are not, they're pro-Hamas, pro-Iran. It's amazingly weak towards our people who, Iran is declaring, openly among themselves, that has been reported, and we have it, about how they view the United States. They're flipping us the political bird.
Right.
On one hand, they're saying, yes, we're going to sign a treaty with the United States. And on the other hand, they're telling their people it's like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is the treaty Muhammad signed simply to get people off his back until he had the strength to attack him and kill him, which is what he ended up doing. So, it's like we have a bunch of junior high schoolers, or maybe that's a little harsh to junior high schoolers.
Right.
It's as if we have a bunch of children doing what should be serious, thoughtful business of national security. I think that's a big part of the answer to your question. Now, the duty to do that, everyone in that White House who has authority there, who's not doing that, who says they don't know, or these are all nice organizations, these people need to go to jail.
Right.
And so who's going to do that? You have a Congress that has proven themselves to be devoid of leadership.
Yes.
And you have a Department of Justice whose leader, the Attorney General, is following the president's footsteps, which he's not supposed to do. He's an independent member of the president's, part of this administration is supposed to uphold justice under the Constitution and the rule of law. She's not doing.
I don't want to drag you into a place of being accused of slander here, but do you think it's possible that the president, through his desire to disarm the American people, of guns that would assist the U.S. people, the American people, to defend themselves against an attack, an Islamic attack, do you think it's possible that he's in league with Islamists, jihadis, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, to disarm the American people, to bring Sharia to America. I mean, is it possible? That's all floating around out there. I mean, let's put this thing to bed here. Do you think there's even a possibility of that?
Well, I think the fact that he's in league with them has already been established. I
Right.
think to get the intent of why he is so anti-gun, you could, an anti, army. I do know this. In other words, I can't get inside his head to determine the intent on that. The fact that he's in league with the Muslim Brotherhood is well established. The fact that there are Muslim Brotherhood leaders inside, uh, the Muhammad Majids, the Huma Abedins, and these other individuals that have been, until recently, until he got demonstrated to be completely pro Hamas, Mohammed El Biari, who was held a senior position at DHS, and so many of these other individuals who are inside there. Rashad Hussein, who's currently the strategic communications director for counterterrorism for the White House. I mean, it's astounding. So what do you do with that? So the fact that he's in league with them, I think, is he's met with them in the White House on a number of occasions.
Right.
He has spoken favorably, supported the Muslim Brotherhood over the President Mubarak of Egypt and his overthrow, and continues to defend the Muslim Brotherhood and say that they're our partners, despite the fact that they call for our overthrow in their own documents and evidence that we have, that their leaders are what we would call terrorists, because Hamas is an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
So the question has to be, if that's the baby of the Muslim Brotherhood, it's not a friend of the Muslim Brotherhood, it's an inherent part. It's the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas. Then why don't we just declare all of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States or globally a terrorist organization?
Thank you.
But so he's in league with them. Why he wants to disarm the American public, again, I can't get into his head, but I will say is this: every despot and tyrant in history has moved to disarm the citizenry before taking hostile actions against them. So I find it a very dangerous situation, and Americans shouldn't tolerate it.
You're doing quite well here. You're answering a bunch of questions that we did not discuss before. So I'm throwing a bunch of fastballs at you here. One more fastball before, and then we'll take a break, John. I have wondered openly and privately whether or not Barack Obama is using. You're familiar with the tenet of taqiyya in Islam, right?
Yes.
I've wondered, John. Maybe you can speak to this or not if you're not comfortable. If he doesn't use the veil of Christianity, he said in front of an interview with George Stephanopoulos, hey, listen, John McCain never said anything disparaging about my Muslim faith. And then George Stephanopoulos interrupted him and said, excuse me, Mr. President, don't you mean your Christian faith? Oh, yeah, right, my Christian faith, stuff like that. So I wonder, John, and you can pass on this if you want. I don't know. It's up to you. But is it possible that he's using the veil of whatever crowd he's speaking to? That's the religious flavor that he accommodates at the moment. He credited Gandhi with winning his first election as president. He's been endorsed by the Buddhists and even people close to him in the White House have said, listen, the guy's an atheist. And when he's in a crowd of Christians, he claims to be a Christian, even though he repeatedly disparages the Christian faith constantly. Is it possible he's using this as a form of taqiyya to sort of gain the people's trust, to get the Islamic viewpoints thrust down the people's throats of America?
It's an interesting way to phrase the question. Well, sure, it's possible. Let me, for your audience, just clarify something. Taqiyya is actually more of a tactical part of Islam, which is primarily used by Shia to disguise their faith to Sunni to protect them.
Okay.
But the Islamic law under holding one's tongue, lying, and specifically permissible lying, are subheadings of the law, in which it is permissible to lie if the goal is permissible and obligatory to lie if the goal is obligatory. And Jihad is obligatory. So this is for
Right.
Muslims. So yes, I mean that just to clarify that lying is an inherent part of Islamic law, the Sharia. Now, I will just say this: when it comes to the president, you're asking, maybe he's just nothing. Maybe he's agnostic or atheist, and he just wears the veil in order to lie about it. Sure, that's possible. He certainly does not demonstrate any outward signs that he is a Christian.
Right.
He certainly demonstrates a hostility towards our constitutional republic and the underpinnings of the rule of law in this country. That's, I would argue, very clear. And I want to go back to something I said, and I'll do this very quickly since you want to go to break, is
Yes.
when people ask me these types of questions or questions about who he really is, I just say, look at the man himself and look at his policies. The man himself, here's a guy who was his father and his stepfather were both Muslim.
Right.
His mother was kind of an amalgam of a socialist, communist, Muslim. She's an interesting cat. And his primary mentor, Frank Marshall Davis, is an avowed communist.
Right.
He grows up in Islamic schools, and then he goes on to learn about Alinsky, studies there in Chicago, learns Alinskyism, Rules for Radicals, which is revolutionary Marxism. And by the way, the book Rules for Radicals, in its insert, is in its front there, it's dedicated to Lucifer, the devil. And so he studies this, and then he teaches Alinskyism, which is revolutionary Marxism, about how to overthrow a country. Now he takes office and says, we're going to fundamentally change America. And he does a bunch of things, and then people are surprised. Why would we be surprised at how he does it, and that he tries to be a part of every group that he's around? Well, that's Alinskyism. Why does he try to disarm the citizenry? Well, that's Marxism. That's Alinskyism. Why does he do the things he does? Why does he just attack the messenger and not the message when the message is true? Because that's what Alinskyism calls for. He is really doing what he was raised to do. I don't see how a guy like that could ever really honor or respect the Declaration and the founding principles of this country, which are found in the Declaration, and then first kind of practically implemented in the Constitution. When you grow up under those circumstances, under the underpinnings of Sharia, communists, Marxists. So yeah, I don't know that he has an affinity or a loyalty to any system, but he certainly doesn't honor and respect the founding principles and the rule of law here, because he's just shown a complete disregard. But what would you expect from a guy like that? And then you look at his policies. He's negotiating with the Taliban. He's negotiating with Iran, who have vowed to destroy us. He allows Muslim brothers great leeway. We materially support Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and Libya. We are decreasing and deteriorating our nuclear forces, our naval fleet, our infantry in the Army and the Marine Corps. We have a grid and infrastructure here in the United States that's completely wide open to an EMP attack. We cozy up to communist regimes like Cuba, and quite frankly, in China. We leave our allies swinging in the wind and don't know, what we're going to do, what they're going to do, with the increasing global Islamic threat. So you see these things in his policies. And why are they surprising? But they just reflect a man who has no appreciation for the oath that he took. Well, I think in summary, you have a president who's doing exactly what you would expect him to do, who grew up with a father and stepfather who are, Sharia adherent Muslims, a guy who studied Marxist revolutionary ideology, a guy whose greatest mentor, according to him, Frank Marshall Davis, is an avowed communist. You get somebody who doesn't appreciate the constitutional republic, the founding principle in this country is articulated in the Declaration that our rights come from God, and therefore the individual individuals come together and consent to form a government by surrendering their right to self-government and create a government whose purpose is to secure the liberties that God gave us. None of that will make sense to a guy like President Obama. And yet the American people elected him and allowed him to be the president and are allowing the rule of law to be trampled on by this administration.
What do you think? What do you think that says about the American people, though? I mean, can you sum it up in one sentence? You can't beat free stuff. I mean, with all the promises of free phones and free all this and health care, and you just can't beat free stuff, can you?
Well, I think I have a lot of faith in the American people. I think what's happened is you have a generation of people, and maybe two generations, who have grown up without any understanding of the founding principles.
Right.
The founders made it very clear that the Bible should be taught in public school, and actually was into the the 20th century, and the understanding that the moral and religious framework for this country is Christianity.
Right.
George Washington said it. All the founding fathers said it. And by the way, the Supreme Court ruled on it.
Right.
And we have investigations from Senate and House committees, and the morality and standards should be Christian. But you say that today, and people are like, "Oh my God, what are you talking about?" That was understood by the founders. As a matter of fact, the founders actually understood it that judges and elected officials in the United States should be Christian, and not anybody who's not an acclaimed, an avowed Christian. Because without the moral framework, as the founders said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And I think I know that without the Christian moral framework as the bedrock underneath the republic, we'll lose it.
Right.
And say a large number of them do not understand that.
Right. Well, we're speaking with John Guandola here, folks. You can find all of his material at understandingthethreat.com. And we're going to go ahead and take this time out, John, and we'll be right back with the 6 reasons Islam is the religion of war. John didn't say it. He's just confirming it. We'll be right back. Well, if you missed the first part of this show, you probably still have all your hair. I mean, our guest is John Guandolo. He is the founder of understandingthethreat.com. Understandingthethreat.com is his website. And I'm not going to get into who he is again, other than his name, because his introduction was long. You'll have to go to the beginning of the show to hear it again. But trust me, you have got to pay attention to this man. Go back and listen to the first half of the show for some shocking insight into Islam and its infiltration into America. It is amazing. But now we switch gears here. We get into the words of al-Baghdadi. He's the titular head of ISIS, apparently, or Islamic State, or ISIL, or IS, or whatever you want to call them these days. And he said when he said, Islam is not the religion of peace. Islam is the religion of war. And was he right? I mean, he meant it, but was he right? To speak to all this is possibly the foremost expert on earth on this very topic, John Guandolo. I'm pleased to have you on the show, man. You're doing a great job.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm not sure I deserve that accolade, but thank you.
Well, I happen to know a little bit about who you are, and I say you deserve it. But listen, you have written a list here. 6 reasons indicating al-Baghdadi is correct. So let's go through them here, John. Number 1, I'll read the reason, and you give us a little bit of background on it. Islamic world is united, and teaching jihad must be waged until Islam rules the world. Are you kidding me, John? This is a religion of peace. They just want their little postage stamp area out there in the sands of the desert somewhere. They don't want to rule the world. Come on.
Beginning at the first grade level, a review of textbooks from Islamic schools in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, Middle East, Asia, up through junior high school texts, as well as all, meaning 100% of published authoritative Islamic law, all says that the purpose of Islam is to rid the world of the Dar al-Harb, the house or abode of war, until the entire world is the Dar al-Islam, the house or abode of Islam.
Right.
So Islam splits the world into those two camps. And the purpose of Islam, the Dar al-Harb, is any place where there is not an Islamic rule under Sharia.
Right.
And so from the first grade level up to authoritative Islamic law, the Muslim world teaches its adherents that Islam must destroy the Dar al-Harb until the entire world is under an Islamic state ruled by a caliph, and Sharia is the law of the land. So there's no such thing as a Islamic textbook taught in an Islamic school that says something contrary to that.
Right.
So the question is, now I'm even open if someone wants to argue the point, but the point, I want to make sure that we're all clear. The point they're arguing is that the Islamic world is teaching the entire Islamic world the wrong version of Islam.
Yeah.
And so as long as we're clear that that's what you're arguing, then let's have that discussion. But let's do it from a factual basis and not from the world that you wish it were. Let's deal with the facts as they stand.
Thank you. And that brings us to number 2. Senior Islamic scholars call for jihad against non-Muslims. The senior Islamic scholars, do they have non-senior, sub-level scholars who are out there saying, because we hear them on NPR, John. These Islamic scholars say, we want peace, these terrorists and these jihadists, they're not speaking for Islam. But you're saying that the senior Islamic scholars, the ones that we see on Memory TV, those guys, the ones that don't think there are any non-jihadists in the audience, those guys are the ones teaching the truth, right? Truth about Islam.
Well, 2 things there. When the Muslim leaders go on TV and they're talking to you or a non-Muslim audience,
right,
they're obliged to lie if they're adherents of Sharia. So you either have somebody talking who's either ignorant of Islamic law or is fully understanding of Islamic law, which is most likely the case, and they're lying.
That brings us back to taqiyya, like we were talking about earlier.
That's right, the Islamic law of lying.
Right.
So, but it's interesting if you look at the scholars. Isn't it interesting that you look at these great scholars like Omar Abdel Rahman, one of the most respected Islamic scholars in the world, who's in federal prison now because he gave legal authority for the '93 World Trade Center bombing,
That's the blind sheikh, right?
That's the blind sheikh.
Yeah.
You've got guys like Abdullah Azzam, who not only went to Al-Azhar University, the most preeminent school of Islamic jurisprudence on the planet, but he actually taught there. And this is the guy who, with Osama bin Laden, formed Al-Qaeda. And you have many other examples. Isn't it interesting that these very senior scholars say the same things that Al-Qaeda says?
Yeah, right. And then the guys like Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi. Am I saying that name right?
You are.
Oh.
Yeah, here's a guy. This is the guy who, after the Muslim Brotherhood overthrew Mubarak, the very first Friday Jummah prayer in Egypt in Tahrir Square, where over 1 million people gathered. He's the guy that spoke and led Jummah prayer. Yusuf al-Qaradawi twice offered the position of supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood and denied it, didn't want it. And this is a guy who calls for the killing of all Americans, including civilians in Iraq, who's revered in the Muslim world. His show on Al Jazeera was, and it may still be, but it was for a time, the most popular show internationally on Al Jazeera. This is the guy who runs Islam Online. I mean, he is revered in the Muslim world. And he calls for jihad until the entire world is under the Islamic rule.
Right. Here's an interesting one. Number 3. This is funny in a way, but it's sad in the truth of it. And that is that all terrorists get their version of Islam wrong in the exact same way. Explain that to us.
Well, if you listen to what they say from the 9/11 hijackers, quite frankly, we can go back to the Iranian Revolution, but the individuals and groups like Hezbollah that perpetrated the bombing on the Marine barracks in the 80s, all the way to 9/11, to the Al-Shabaab who kills people in the malls, and recently on the university campus there in Kenya, to Americans, from the underwear bomber to the Christmas tree bomber to, well, quite frankly, the Garland, Texas shooters and everyone in between. They all say it's a command from Allah to wage jihad and impose Islamic law. And the sources they cite and the things that they say are exactly the same.
Right.
What we're told is they're getting their Islam wrong. And I just say, isn't it interesting? They get it all wrong in the exact same way, citing the exact same sources, which, by the way, the sources they're citing are authoritative according to Islam.
Right. I'm gonna quote you now. This is from an article that you wrote about this. You wrote, "Isn't it interesting? They all say it is a command from Allah to wage jihad until the infidels submit to Allah's law and an Islamic state is created. Isn't it interesting they use the same source material to quote these commands, all of which have unquestioned authority in Islam?" I mean, these people are getting, they say, well, this ISIS thing, that's not Islamic, John. That's not Islamic. And yet, all of it is Islamic, isn't it?
Yeah. And which leads to point 6, but I'll let you get to it.
Well, point 4. Let's don't skirt over point 4 here because it's a good one. Former Muslims confirm Islam obliges jihad and strict adherence to Sharia. People who come out of that demonic religion, they all say the same thing, right?
Right. I mean, you listen to people like Waleed Shobat and Nani Darwish, and Kamal Salim, and they all, of course, say that this is what Islam teaches. This is what we learned. Specifically, this is what we learned in elementary school, that you must hate the Christians and Jews, that the Jews are evil, that you must wage jihad for the sake of Allah. And we have videos, some of it's on memory, where young school children speak out in poetry, wishing to die in jihad as little 8, 9-year-old children.
Right.
Well, what are they, making that up on their own? No, they're being taught in Islamic schools that this is what it is.
Right. And, you got to take people like Waleed Shobat. Waleed is a friend of ours, he and his son. And, I mean, you got to take these guys seriously. These guys that are former terrorists, we got to take these guys seriously. Number 5, the history of Islam is consistent with their doctrine, the doctrine of Sharia.
That's right. Let's just go back to the 7th century. In the Quran, first of all, when you understand the Quran, it must be understood that 3 times in the Quran, 3 separate verses, um, uh, Allah, because that's who is speaking in the Quran, as it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, Allah says that whatever comes later chronologically overrules what came before. And chronologically, and by the way, that's why all the scholars understand it, chronologically, the last word in the Quran about jihad is in Surah 9, chapter 9, which says, Surah 9:5, fight and slay the unbelievers wherever you find them and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. And then for the Christians, you get Surah 9:29. So in Surah 9:29, we get that for people who have a holy book at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, you have that third option. Surah 9:5 says convert or be killed. Surah 9:29 says people of the book, you may become dhimmis, pay the non-Muslim poll tax, the jizya, and feel yourselves subdued. And so that's it. So that's what the Quran said. That's what it says chronologically last.
Right.
The last word in the Quran chronologically in chapter 5, Surah 5, about relations between Muslims and non-Muslims. Surah 5 says, take not the Jews and Christians as your friends. They are but friends of one another. So that's the last word on jihad and relations between non-Muslims.
Right.
Then Muhammad says, I have been commanded to fight them until they testify there's no God but God, or they pay the jizya. And then he went out and did it. And he himself killed people. He himself slaughtered Jews at the Battle of the Trench. He himself went out and bound the hands and feet of those he captured, cut off their hands, and burned their eyes with pieces of metal, which is why in Iraq we found American soldiers in that state. Because this is what it is. Muhammad's the most perfect example of the man. So he follows the commands of Allah. So we see then from his death in 632 forward, when they captured Jerusalem, and the wars that we fought in the 8th century and forward in the 200 years of the Crusades, which was a defensive response to 450 years of Muslim aggression into Western lands, and up through, quite frankly, today. The first war America fought after the Revolution was against Muslims, was against the Barbary states.
Right. Was that
and
Jefferson?
Thomas Jefferson and John Adams asked, hey, why are, he asked the potentate from Tripoli, who was the emissary to Britain, the Muslim, he asked him, why are you seizing our ships and capturing our women? And he said, because it's a command from Allah. It's what the Quran requires. So this is nothing new. We've only forgotten it in the last 50 years.
Is that why is Jefferson's Quran is in the White House today, is because of that event?
That is exactly why Jefferson has a Quran, had a Quran, and it, remained in his possession, his library, because he wanted to understand the enemy.
Right.
It's not because he respected Islam as some peaceful religion. It's because he went to war against the Muslims.
Right. Okay. We're at number 6. Where is the other version of Islam taught? Is there any other version, John?
No. It's interesting. That's my question.
Right.
Where is this other mystical version of Islam
Peaceful.
that I keep hearing about?
Right.
Because show me. Here's what I've asked. I will tell you this. What I used to say, because Muslim brothers show up and people show up to harass me when I do public speaking, and they'll stand up and they'll go, oh, that's there are thousands of interpretations of Islamic law.
Really?
And what I used to say is, well, that's a bunch of crap. And this guy's lying. And what happened was the audience would be like, oh, he's being mean to that Muslim guy.
Poor Muslim guy, right?
Yes. So what I do now is when they stand up and they say this nonsense, I just say, okay, can you name for me one textbook, one authoritative book of Islamic law that's taught to Muslims, or any author, an authoritative scholar who says something other than what I'm putting out? Can you name one?
Right.
And they're frozen because they cannot, because there is no such thing as an other version of Islam.
Right.
Let me just put it more succinctly. when a few years ago I spoke to a 4-star general and I said, sir, what if I told you Al-Qaeda has never misquoted Islamic law in furtherance of what they do? What would you say? And he responded by saying that would completely change the nature of how we're fighting this war. And I explained to him that that was actually true, and he ended up giving me the name of the intelligence officer for the Marine Corps, and I ended up doing a briefing a couple weeks later. But the point of this is, where are the thousands of interpretations?
Right.
They don't exist. Let me be very clear to your audience. 100% of Islam is completely in line with what jihad is, what its obligation is, and the obligation of Islam to eradicate the Dar al-Harb, the abode of war, and put the entire world under the rule of Islam. That's what Islam is, period. If there are people who identify themselves as Muslims who don't adhere to that, well, that's fine. But that does not constitute another version of Islam.
And, I'm always amazed when I think about, the book by Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, translated to English means My Struggle.
Right.
And the word jihad means struggle, right?
No, it does not.
What does it mean?
That's what they'll tell you. If you break down the history of the Arabic word jihad, and you're like, what are you talking about? You see, because it's a matter of law what jihad means.
Right.
Jihad only means, in Islamic law, warfare against non-Muslims.
Okay.
There is no other definition in authoritative Islamic law of the word jihad. So that's like me being in a court of law, a federal court, and telling a judge, well, Your Honor, if you take the history of the phrase U.S. persons, what it means is people that aspire to be American. And the judge would say, hey, stop. We're in a court of law. I'm about to hold you in contempt
Right. Because
the phrase U.S. person has been defined by law as to what it means. Now, what is your comment, counselor?
Right.
You see, because this is a matter of law. We're talking about a legal system,
Okay.
a totalitarian system. That's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I should stop telling people that jihad means struggle in any sense?
Yes.
Okay. In no sense it means struggle. It means warfare against non-Muslims. That's what it means.
Right, because...
What if you're writing it down, though? What if you're writing the word jihad down in English? Like if you're translating it, what would you translate that word to? You need to use the whole sentence to translate the one word?
Well, if you're asking, no, jihad means, the word is jihad.
Right.
But when you're asking for a definition of it,
okay.
it only means that warfare against non-Muslims. That's what it's only ever meant.
Right.
And so there's no confusion in Islam about that. Or the question is, why would they teach first graders that that's what it means? And so let me be clear about this too, so we're clear on Islamic law.
Yes.
Islamic law obliges adherent Muslims to lie if it's obligatory, if the goal is obligatory. Okay? It is a capital crime in Islam for a Muslim to teach another Muslim anything that's incorrect about Islam.
Okay.
So, of course, what you need to do if you want to know what Islam is go into a Muslim bookstore, which is usually right around the mosque.
Right.
I would take buy in cash.
Okay.
And then buy a book of Islamic law.
Wait, why cash? Why would you take cash?
Well, because let's be smart about it.
Okay.
Look, buy 10 books of Islamic law. If you're so sure that I'm wrong and that this is all crazy, spend the money. Buy 10 books of Islamic law. Buy 15 books. And what you will find when you do that, when you buy authoritative Islamic law published for a Muslim audience, is it is crystal clear. It's vanilla.
Right. Wait a minute. I can get back to this pay cash thing, John. You're just glancing over that. Do I become a target if it shows up on the grid that I'm buying Islamic literature?
No, I'm thinking of it more from I don't want my credit card number and stuff, because there's a high probability that Islamic Center is a Muslim Brotherhood Hamas Islamic Center since about 85+% of them in the country are.
Right.
I would just caution that.
Gotcha. Okay. I see what you're saying there, John. Okay. We're going to wrap this up here with the big question. Everybody wants to know, John, and we're all hoping you've got the answer. What's it going to take to stop this? How do we put an end to this nonsense, John? I mean, Jefferson had the right idea. He sent the Navy down there and he dealt with it, right? I mean, how do we deal with this? Put a stop to it now.
Well, a couple things. Number one, this enemy has only ever been defeated on the field of battle.
Right.
And so let's just kind of put that out there. But I think what it's going to take are some principled, courageous leaders who have the integrity to do what's right and to make strong decisions and to decide that our founding principles, our Constitution, and the rule of law must be defended and fought for. So you have enough evidence right now to shut down, I don't know, 20, 30 of the top Islamic organizations in the country because of their efforts to wage jihad and support jihad, which we call terrorism, materially support it. We have their written documents that show why they exist, which is to overthrow the republic and impose Sharia. And then we have actual actions that they've taken by teaching these things to their people. And many of these Islamic centers have actually supported acts of jihad, like the Islamic Community Center of Phoenix, owned by the Muslim Brotherhood's bank, the North American Islamic Trust, which was the place that, quote unquote, radicalized Ibrahim Simpson and the other shooter there in Garland, Texas,
right.
Sufi. So, and we can do that with the Boston bombers at the Islamic Society of Boston, Muslim Brotherhood entity founded by an Al-Qaeda guy,
Right.
Major Nadal Hassan. You can go through all of these events. So we have them actually supporting acts of terrorism, jihad. So I think it's going to take principled leadership, courageous leadership, and a re-emphasis, I believe, a national campaign to educate Americans about the basis for our founding, that we were founded on the principle that our rights come from God, therefore no man in government can take them from us, that we have a right to defend ourselves, that there's only one duty actually stipulated, stated in the Declaration, and that is the right to revolution. That is the duty to overthrow tyrannical government in this country, and that our first best shot at the Constitution, at the ideal of the Declaration is the Constitution, that we cannot understand the Constitution unless we understand it in light of the Declaration.
Right, right.
Because the founding document is the Declaration, not the Constitution.
Gotcha.
And I think those two things, we have to know that there's something worth fighting for, not just fighting against. And this is clearly a cancer in our society. It's a cancer to the Western civilization, and it needs to be cut out, rooted out, or destroyed as best we're able to under the rule of law.
You are the founder of understandingthethreat.com. If people go there, John, is there a call to action on your website? Can people get involved at their level? I mean, they can buy your book, they can get your material to get a better understanding above and beyond what they've gotten in this 1 hour show. Above that, though, is there a call to action on your website? How do people get involved?
Okay, a couple things. One, the book, Raising a Jihadi Generation, can be purchased on the website or at Amazon.com or wherever else. There's a 90-minute DVD that takes a lot of what we've talked about here and presents it using the evidence of the Muslim Brotherhood's presence here in the United States.
I'm getting that DVD, John. I have got to get that and get that information, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good, what a lot of people do is they bring groups together and they'll show the DVD
Right.
and then have me Skype in and kind of give an update and answer questions. And then, yes, there is a call to action, but you can't take any action until you understand, not because you heard it from me today,
Right.
but until you actually let this digest and do your own research based on the things that are on the website. Now, I'm actually in the next several days, no later than mid next week, am going to be relaunching a new website, which is going to be much more user friendly, and there will be a call to action, but it's also, I would encourage people, you've got to join one of the grassroots groups that's out there I think the best one is Act for America.
Act for America, okay.
Act for America, because they plug you immediately in to the national security issues, and you get regular updates, and you get plugged into a lot of stuff. So I think that's something you can do.
Great.
I think the strategy to win this in the United States is we have to have principled leaders that are going to identify these threats and legally go after them, shut them down, run them out of your community. But it's got to be at the local level. Things are so bad right now that you can liken this, because of the thousands of Muslim Brotherhood organizations here and jihadi organizations, you can liken this to an insurgency.
Wow.
And in a counterinsurgency, the focus of main effort, the tip of the spear, are local police. Now, your local police are not going to act unless their local elected officials allow them to and the citizens call for it. So citizens have to be engaged, have to be educated through your church, through civic organizations, and they have to put positive pressure on local elected officials to allow the police to do what they need to do to identify and root these jihadis out of your community. These guys that are working with school boards, working with state legislatures, they have to be identified and rooted out using all legal means. The two most important people groups are sheriffs and pastors.
Okay.
Sheriffs because they're the most powerful law enforcement officers in the country, and pastors because on any given Sunday they can really move thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions. But many pastors are not even talking about this issue.
What do you have to say to, John, I wish we would have gotten into this earlier because we're almost out of time, but what do you have to say to people who are concerned about the immigration issue? Now, they're bringing thousands of Muslims, a large percentage, well, you say 100% of those who take Islam seriously, 100% of those are potential terrorists, right?
Well, it's not only that. The refugee resettlement program, I would encourage people to go to Ann Corcoran's site, which I'm freezing on right now, but if you type in Ann Corcoran and refugee resettlement, you'll get her site. If you Google that. She is just a citizen who saw what was happening in her community,
right,
and has become a real spearhead for this issue on refugee resettlement.
Yeah, I've seen one of her videos.
It's absolutely, she's doing tremendous work on this. But yes, thousands of, and not just immigrants. These are people being brought in from countries that hate us.
Right.
And this is not the way legally our immigration system is supposed to work. So these are people who are coming in who naturally despise our system from countries that openly call for our destruction. And we're bringing the very people from those communities who are most likely to wage war against us, who are jihadis.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an amazing thing, John. As you can tell, I'm almost speechless when I listen to you describe the state of affairs, the zeitgeist, if you will, in America and around the world. And it seems like, like you said, the people who can do something about it are complicit in it, and it's very disturbing. You almost hate to say that judgment from God is upon America for being such a resembling, people talk about Sodom and Gomorrah and Babylon and all this stuff, and with all of the promiscuity and divorce and just rampant sin throughout the country, people are wondering now more and more openly, is God's judgment about to fall on America? I'm not going to dump that one on you, John. That's a heavy one, huh?
Yeah, I think we certainly are not in keeping with our founding principles, and that's for sure.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm not going to burden you with that question. That's for others and another time. Thank you, John, so much. Visit John's website, understandingthethreat.com. Get the DVDs, get the books, get the material, get involved. My name is Mike Shoesmith. Thanks, John.
Today, we face a dangerous and imminent threat from the global Islamic movement, which is waging total war against the West, a kinetic, economic, social, psychological, spiritual, and informational war. Our leadership neither knows
nor understands this enemy, yet continues to commit American blood and treasure to the war effort that is unfocused and unending.